I was really tempted to start this video with you know how I just threw out 1/3 of my entire book collection? Let's go shopping for replacements! And then I did what in Scottish terms we would call having a word with myself. As in like, gonna have a word with yourself. And so instead of creating that self-fulfilling prophecy, let us instead term this as the apocalypse. Is everything okay? Did I say something wrong? Let us instead class this as an exploration through a bunch of upcoming book birthdays. And I know it's not my birthday, but there's a lot of presents here I'd like to buy for myself. Help. See, the sun came back out. Even the remaining days of summer are in my corner. Okay, not in my corner. I get it. I get it. Not going to be complicit in my book buying. And welcome back to another video. And I have to preface this entire video by saying that summer really is just hanging on by the skin of its teeth, and today is like a last get off my lawn. So the fan is on in the background and my window might be open at some point, so you may hear droning or traffic noise. Otherwise it would just be a case of like melting. Realistically, melting may actually categorise both my mental health and my bank account after this video. Before we get into spilling the tea on some of my more problematic book buying habits, I would first like to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Ana Luisa. I am not only an Ana Luisa VIP. At this point, I am an Ana Luisa stan. They are not only my favourite place to get jewellery for myself, but they're also my favourite place to get jewellery for everybody else. And we're talking here today about book birthdays, about books that are just about to be published and come into the world. But we might as well also talk about people birthdays, because realistically everybody in my life is getting Ana Luisa for their birthday. And that is because I don't think I've ever found a jewellery brand that has more versatile pieces to suit so many different people, because their collection is made up of a variety of timeless pieces which will serve anybody for years and years, and also some really unique statement pieces that are going to speak to those particular people in your life who like to express themselves with their jewellery. So for example, today I am wearing their classic gold letter necklace in the letter L. This is not only a timeless piece for me, but it's also deeply nostalgic, because as a little kid I could never get my whole name printed on anything. But also, for contrast, here is one of their beautiful statement pieces. This is the Kenzie necklace in malachite. And of course, for all of my witchy girlies out there, we all know that malachite is best used for regulating your body, for helping to draw out and dispel those negative emotions. So if you would like to shop for some of those beautiful timeless pieces, or a statement piece for yourself or a loved one, then now is a perfect time, because it is also Ana Luisa's 5th birthday, and we would like to invite you to party with us by clicking my link down below or using my code on screen to get 20% off your first purchase. Come celebrate with us, and I promise you, you won't regret it. Okay, so it's on to the piece of the programming where I call myself out, or maybe less actually call myself out on the mat and more like gently remind myself that going into 2024 we are going to stick to our new and improved purchase plan. I know you guys have heard me say this a few times in the last couple of months, but I have really been taking a closer look at my book buying in the second half of 2023. That's partially because of videos like I unhauled 1/3 of my library because it was no longer making me happy, my series spreadsheet video wherein I was actually fully confronted with the amount of ongoing series that I had that I either didn't want to be reading anymore or was never going to get through without prioritising them. And also, of course, this square on my bingo board, this infamous square, which started out as read 80% of my 2023 purchases, until we discovered that I was going to need some hacks to bring this number down a little bit, because otherwise this goal would have been physically impossible. Now, I've also been very clear with you guys in that I always plan to have a huge TBR. I am not somebody who looks at their bookish collection and is like, oh my god, I have over 20 books that I haven't read, how am I going to get through all of them, when am I going to read them? And so realistically, I know that no matter how many books I unhaul or how many books I read, I'm always going going to be collecting books. However, I noticed several trends when I was unhauling books from my library. First of all, I realised that I had a lot of really hyped books in my collection. Hyped books which I actually had no intentions of reading. Books where even as I was actively purchasing them, I was going, there are these things in this book which don't usually work for me. I'm a little bit concerned that I won't prioritise this book before other books. But I went ahead with the purchase anyway because for whatever reason this book was a book that everybody was talking about, or my friends were talking about, or my favourite authors even were talking about, and I really wanted to read it based on that alone. Those hyped books made up a disturbingly and disproportionately large portion of that unhaul, and so I want to be very careful in the second half of this year and going into 2024 that I set myself up for success. The books that I'm bringing into my library are books that I'm deeply invested in or very enthusiastic about from the beginning. And then there is, of course, my favourite problematic trait, buying more than one book from an author before you have tried them first. Now that initially sounds like a really easy no-brainer thing, right? Like, you find a new author, you find a book, you buy the book, you read the book, you like the book, so therefore you go and buy other things from the author. But that's not always how it works in my head. And I have realised that that's partially because I come from a hoarding background, wherein as soon as my mum got one thing that she was obsessed with, we got all of those things. But also because my little brain goes, oh, that synopsis sounds amazing. Sounds like the best thing ever. Let's look at all the synopses for all of their other books. And then they sound amazing. And then I end up with all of their other books. And the problem with this one is that this has paid off for me really well in the past, as well as biting me hugely in the arse. So unfortunately for this one, there is as much positive reinforcement in my backstory as there is negative reinforcement, which means that this one is going to be a harder habit to break. But we are going to try to nevertheless. And then the final thing that we are going to try and avoid going into the later half of this year and 2024 is that we are going to try and avoid the scenario whereby I would walk to my shelves, pick up a book and go, that sounds great, but when am I going to read it? Because for me, there is a big difference between having a large TBR of books that I know that at any moment I could pick up and prioritise, and having a large TBR which consists of two categories. One being, I am really excited for these books. I remember their synopses and first pages in my head and I can't wait to get to them. Or again, I bought books on recommendation, but for whatever reason, the second category of books are just books that I look at and I go, eventually. And more of those eventuallys were turning into maybes. Maybe I will read this at some point. Who knows? In the meantime, not only have I purchased it, but it is now not paying rent. Obviously, this is more of a complicated problem when we start looking at like special editions of books or book box special editions of books, where there's a very small, a very finite period of time wherein you can make the decision whether you're going to make that purchase or not. But for the most part, I want to try my best when pre-ordering books or looking into anticipated releases for the following year to prioritise, to be pickier, to ask myself the question, when? And if it is honestly not anytime soon, then maybe, honestly, we don't need to buy the book. So, now that we've all come along on this little rules journey of mine, wherein we are clear that any book buying that goes on for the second half of this year has to fall within these rules, including the pre-orders, let's get on to actually talking about the books. And I'm going to break these books down into a couple of categories for you. The first one being sequels. The first book up makes me smile a whole lot, and that's because you guys actually alerted me to the fact that this was coming out. I somehow completely missed it. I had no idea. And that book is Percy Jackson and the Chalice of the Gods, which is the newest book to come out in the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series. When I showed you guys my series tracker video, we talked about the fact that I hadn't finished the Olympians series, that it was another one of those books that I was either keeping for a rainy day or my brain did a mental block because it was the last book and I didn't want to let them go. But now, lo and behold, there is a brand new one out. And I'm not gonna lie, I did kind of feel something release in my brain where I was like, oh, I can finish that series now because it's not over. And I guess that's a problematic thing for another day that we'll unpick later on in book therapy. But for now, I'm just gonna allow myself to be utterly delighted that we get this book. Although I am also going to allow myself to be exceedingly salty that once again, this is the UK cover for this book and it's hideous. The US readers get this beautiful cover instead. I have a lot of feelings about it, okay? So from what I understand, this one is following Percy's senior year in high school, just trying to get through it and get out and actually get to college. But apparently that's not going to be as easy as just writing a personal essay to get in. Instead, Percy is going to need 3 letters of recommendation from Mount Olympus, and so in order to get these letters of recommendation, he is going to have to do 3 tasks for the gods. And apparently the first task, and the reason that the US edition has this beautiful cover, is because Ganymede, Zeus's cupbearer, has lost his golden chalice, and they need to, of course, get it back before it falls into the wrong hands and everything goes kaplooey. But to be honest, I don't really care what they're doing. I literally don't care what they're doing. All I want in the world is just to see these characters be together again. Next up, speaking of Greek gods, on the 3rd of October we are getting volume 5 of Lower Olympus. This is a graphic novel series that you guys know that I have become absolutely obsessed with this year. Like, I have read and reread it, and I am now finding myself getting to the craving point between volumes where I'm like, ooh, I might end up reading the webtoon. For those of you who don't know what this one is, this is a Greek gods retelling essentially. Like, it's marketed as a Hades and Persephone retelling, which is markedly less problematic than the original story, but actually it's not really just about those characters, it's about all of the gods and lesser gods, all brought into a thoroughly modern context. So for example, Hades runs the underworld like a big massive multi-million conglomerate corporation. Hades and Persephone originally meet in a club, and honestly I don't usually really get like kicky feet over romance, but this series, guys, they're such precious cinnamon rolls, and I would lie down on train tracks for them. Next up, in a breakneck change of pace, we have The Christmas Appeal by Janet Hallett, which is sensibly enough not coming out at Christmas. It's actually coming out on the 26th of October, and I think that's a good move from the publishers, because otherwise I think this one would get lost in that like rush of cozy Christmas mystery and crime that comes out at the end of the year. For anybody who's unfamiliar with Janet Hallett, she is a thriller slash mystery writer who predominantly uses mixed media elements to put together her books. And The Christmas Appeal is of course the sequel to The Appeal, which is about a small English town and a group of amateur theatre people who are in the process of putting on a play when a murder happens in their midst. Now initially that does not sound like that moving of a premise, let's be honest, but Janice Hallett's books are entirely written in emails and notes and phone transcripts and text messages. The Appeal has play scripts in it, it has leaflets advertising the play, and all of these little elements mean that she's dropping red herrings just like all over the place. And it's not until the midway point of any of her books where you go, oh, that's what all of those things meant, oh no. It's just so smart, and every one of her books have kept me hanging on by my fingernails until the last page. And so The Christmas Appeal is a return to those same characters over again, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm both thrilled about and a little bit trepidatious about. And I don't know if I necessarily wanted a follow-up so much as I wanted more stuff from Janice Hallett. So in conclusion, we shall see. Another one that I'm going to be perfectly honest, if I didn't know whether I wanted a follow-up for or just new material, is of course Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is another book set in the Legends and Lattes world, but it is in fact a prequel to that first book, and we are following Viv, who of course in Legends and Lattes was absolutely done with being a mercenary, no longer wanted that life for herself, and decided that she was instead going to settle down and open up a coffee shop with a bunch of fantastical oddball characters. And it looks like from the synopsis that this prequel is Viv getting to the point where she is like, nah, I'm done. So we are going to get to see a little bit of her life as a mercenary, which was something that I was initially really excited for. But in this book, Viv gets wounded and she is sent to a little seaside town to recuperate, and then there is a mystery in this seaside town. And I've said before that I don't really think that cozy fantasy is for me, because I spent most of Legends and Lattes being like, okay, I love all of this, I love the place, I love all of these characters, now do something. Which I think is very much not the point of Legends and Lattes. Legends and Lattes is meant to be a like low stakes cozy fantasy wherein no really bad things happen. and you can pretty much be sure that all of your characters that you love are going to get to the end in some way or another. There were points in Legends and Lattes where I was, dare I say, a little bit bored. And so when I heard that we were going back to Vic's past, I was like, yay, plot! But no, I don't really think there's going to be that much plot. So I have pre-ordered the Broken Binding edition of this one, and I am going to read it. If I do not enjoy it significantly more than I enjoyed Legends and Lattes, I am going to cut my losses with this series, no matter how many beautiful editions of the books come out in future. So that brings me to the last sequel that I have pre-ordered, which is the Temple of Fortuna. This is the final book in the Wolf Den trilogy by Elodie Harper. I read the first book in this trilogy, The Wolf Den, early in 2022, and there is actually no particular reason why I haven't carried on with it, because I do have the second book, and I actually really intensely loved The Wolf Den when I read it. So this one is one of those where I'm like, I have no excuse, except that a trend that I'm seeing in my reading is that I'm not prioritising sequels, hence my series tracker. Obviously, I can't tell you much about this one because it is the final one in the series, but this series follows Amara. She was the daughter of a fairly well-ranking doctor in Pompeii, but her parents have fallen into penury, and so Amara is sold to try and pay off some of their debts, and she is sold to a very big and famous brothel in Pompeii. And there she meets a cast of characters who are also owned by the brothel, and the book carries on from there. Honestly, anything past that point really is kind of a spoiler, and I can't think of anything else that I can tell you without giving away plot points, so instead I'm just going to say the writing in these books is absolutely beautiful, and I am so excited for the last book. And it comes out on the 9th of November, so technically if I wanted to I could actually read the sequel at the start of November, and then I could read the last book at the end of November, and then I would have also finished that trilogy. Alright, so now we're moving on to the maybe buy category. These are books that I've read the synopsis for and I am quite excited about, but that I think for various reasons are maybe not books that I should pre-order. The first one of these books actually comes out right at the start of September, so it will probably be out by the time that you are watching this video, and it is The September House. So The September House by Carissa Orlando is a haunted house book, of course. If there's ever a book on this list that has house in the title that isn't haunted, I'm going to be disappointed. And the reason I haven't pre-ordered this one is because there's a lot of things to recommend this book to me, but there's also a lot of things that I'm seeing as potential huge red flags. Like, for example, this is a book about a couple who buy this house thinking it's going to be their dream home and they're going to do a fixer-upper on it, and then inevitably their marriage does break down when some ghostly things start to happen. That is a red flag for me because it is a very overused haunted house trope, and while I do understand that, you know, there has to be a reason for people to come to the house in the first place, the like rocky marriage thing that horror uses is like a, oh, we're gonna buy this house and we're gonna fix it up together and it's gonna fix our marriage. It's just kind of like, in what world does that work? Buying houses, having babies and having puppies are three of the most stressful experiences that you can have in your life, so why do authors have this weird idea that any of those things is going to bring you together and not just like, I don't know, it's also the reason that I don't read domestic thrillers, because realistically if I am coming into a book with two people that are already miserable being around each other, my solution for that is just split up. However, this book does have a few things that I am quite excited about, like the idea that both of them acknowledge pretty much very early on that no, this is actually hauntings. Because another trope in horror is that the wife in the pairing will quite often believe in everything that's happening, and then the husband will be like, oh, I don't know what you mean. That chair that moved across the room on its own, that must have some explanation, it's a draft. But the other thing that's a massive plus for me is that Margaret, who is the wife in the couple, is like, no, this is my house, I am staying here, I am making this work. And then the synopsis says that we move to like 4 years later when Margaret is like making this work. She's staying in this house no matter what happens. And Hal, on the other hand, has been completely driven mad by all of the things that have gone on and just needs to get away. But he doesn't just go away, he goes missing. And in the wake of him going missing and becoming incommunicado, their adult daughter turns up at the house determined to try and find her father. But then September rolls around and the hauntings get worse. So yeah, you can see there is clear excitement for me in this book, even though there's a lot of things that I'm just like, meh, and I don't really know what I want to do about it, to be perfectly honest, so it's not being pre-ordered, but it is on this list. Next up, on the 29th of September, we have got The Stranger Upstairs, and this one is another haunted house book. I didn't plan it this way, these are all in order of the date that they're being published, but in this one, a social media influencer has bought a so-called murder house. A horrible incident took place in this house and it's now on the market for a basement price, and she uses Instagram and TikTok and things to show her followers how they can, on a budget, make their houses look beautiful. So she buys this house on the entire premise that she's going to fix it up live, but then as she's doing that, horrible things start happening. Again, on the one hand, that premise is really exciting to me. I love when social media is referenced in books, particularly about hauntings, because realistically there are whole YouTube channels that are focused on just travelling to haunted destinations and exploring them. So it's kind of like a high time that technology made its way into the horror genre. But the thing that kind of puts me off in this one is, yet again, we have another relationship which is fractured, and also the fact that the social media influencer in question has picked the murder room, the one with the massive bloodstain on the floor, as the master bedroom, and she's just sleeping above floorboards which have a huge bloodstain, which apart from anything else is one of those like weirdly inaccurate things, because in most cases bloodstains like that were like left in floorboards or whatever, the floorboards would be removed before the house was sold because they would actually be like a biological hazard. So that one's one of those where I'm like, can I suspend my disbelief on this one enough to read this? Maybe, maybe not. So this one is definitely one that I'm waiting for reviews on before I invest. Next up, we have another one that I am most definitely 100% going to have to sit on my hands to not pre-order and wait to see what other people think of it. This is The Hexologist by Josiah Bancroft, and the premise for this sounds completely right up my alley. So Ez and Warren Wilby are the main characters of this book, and they are hexologists who are people who are hired to go out and help people with like hauntings, weird things that are living in the walls of their houses, infestations of otherworldly stuff essentially. So this sounds kind of like a fantasy version of like Ed and Lorraine Warren from the Conjuring franchise, and that appeals to me on a lot of different levels, not just because it looks like they actually have a whole functioning relationship, but the thing that makes me go yeah about this synopsis is that they are then hired by the palace essentially because they are told that the king is under the influence of something that he has asked to be baked into a cake, and he has gone so far as to actually put himself into an oven. But when they get there, they discover that it's not just the paranormal problem that he is dealing with, there are secrets in the royal family which go back generations which they need to unpick in order to solve this mystery. And that holds zero appeal to me. I don't want to read about the royal family, even if it is a fictional royal family, in this way. You know, like in high fantasy, I am more than happy to read about kings, queens and courtly stuff. But in this context, when it seems like semi-historical fiction, I'm like, oh, do we have to? This one does also give, from the covers to me, a little bit of steampunky vibes, which is something that I am so uninterested in, I could not tell you. So although it pains me, look at me making good habits. It's actually painful. And then the last one on the maybe pile is All That Consumes Us by Erica Waters, and the reason that this is on the maybe pile is simply because it's YA, and these days I just don't like a lot of YA. I don't pick up a lot of YA, and when it's on my shelves, I'm not reaching for it. Although the amount of YA that I unhauled when I did my big unhaul was relatively small, that is simply because I've been unhauling YA quite rigorously for a few years now. But this one is about a girl who goes to a college in a beautiful crumbling Victorian mansion, and she discovers that the stories that she is trying to write there get really dark and twisty. She's sleepwalking. The things that are down on the page are not things that she feels like came from her brain. And then just as she starts to feel like there's actually something stalking her around the corridors of this college, she discovers a secret about her particular dormitory which like blows the roof off her world and which spurs her forward into action. Cover for this is beautiful. The synopsis has all of the wonderful buzzwords buzzwords, but I have been burned so many times in the past, especially with the words dark academia married together with YA. That one is most certainly on the maybe pile because I'm gonna need somebody else who reads dark academia a lot to tell me whether I should pick this one up or not. Alright, so moving swiftly on from the books that were maybes, the books that I need further opinions or information on, let's look at the books that I have actively pre-ordered. Next up, coming out on the 19th of the 9th, is a YA Dark Academia, which I am more than happy to invest my time in. This one is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid, and when I tell you that I am hyped for this release. So this one is about Effie. She is in her first year at a very prestigious architectural college. She is not having the best of time, she is not fitting in, and so she's spending pretty much all of her time doing what she has done as a coping method her entire life, which is read and reread this book of magical fables that she's had since she was a kid. This book tells the story of a mortal girl who falls in love with a fairy king, and it has a small cult following. But then all of a sudden the estate of the author who wrote that book originally issue a competition for someone to come and design his house. I'm not really sure how that works because he's dead, but I'm sure I'm going to find out. But when Effie gets to the location of the house, which is a crumbling mansion which is practically falling into the sea, she discovers that she's not the only one that is there seeking refuge. And she's not the only one that wants to piece together all of the clues left behind as to whether this book was actually true or not. Okay, the next one is the only book on this list which actually breaks any of my aforementioned rules. Coming out on the 3rd of October, this is Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. If you watched my TBR for September, then you will know that In My Dreams I Hold a Knife is on that TBR, and that is the first book that I purchased from Ashley Winstead, and I have not yet read it. I do, however, now also have The Last Housewife, which is her second book, because I picked it up in The Works in the UK, which is a very small, very cheap bookshop chain. And when I say it was cheap, I mean like it was incredibly cheap. It would have been really silly of me not to pick it up in case I do really love In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. But Ashley Winstead is another one of those authors where every single synopsis sounds like something that I really desperately want to read. And Midnight is the Darkest Hour is also one of those books. So my plan is thus: I'm going to read In My Dreams I Hold a Knife this month, and if I really love it, I will keep my pre-order, and if I'm only like meh about it, then I will cancel my pre-order and I will wait until I read The Last Housewife to decide whether I'm going to pick it up or not. In My Dreams I Hold a Knife and The Last Housewife are on the thriller side of the bandwagon, whereas it sounds like Midnight is the Darkest Hour is more on the like paranormal sort of horror-y side of the bandwagon, and I live there more often than I live on the thriller side these days, so I'm quite torn about it, and I'm really hoping that I love In My Dreams I Hold a Knife because I don't want to cancel my pre-order. So this one is about Ruth. She is a librarian in a very small town in Louisiana, and this is a very small and very like suspicious town. This town has a lot of history and superstitions and things that they believe, and one of the myths that they believe is that there is a vampire which sneaks in people's windows and drains their souls during the night. And unfortunately that is only upheld by Ruth's father, who is a pastor and who is like very fire and brimstone and uses this as like a scare tactic for the community. But then a skull is found in a swamp that has mysterious symbols carved on it, and Ruth instantly knows that she and her best friend are the only people who can stop this town from completely combusting. Because Ruth's friend Everett himself has a dark and secret past which might very well intersect with some of the myths in the town's history. Next up, I have one that I am very excited about, but also a tiny bit trepidatious about. Coming out on the 12th of October, we have got The Black Feathers by Rebecca Netley. Now, last year I read The Whistling by Rebecca Netley and I absolutely fell in love with it. I was head over heels invested up until like the last sort of 40 pages where a really problematic thing is said in regards to a character's facial disfigurement, which up until that point in the book had been really beautifully and sensitively handled. Up until that point I was genuinely like, this is one of the things that I will bring up in my review, and then all of a sudden that happened. As soon as I finished that one, I looked up Rebecca Netley and I saw that this one had been announced, and I was like, okay, I will pre-order it and I'm gonna read it, and if anything else sort of like problematic along the same vein happens, then that's going to be my last Rebecca Netley book. So this is about Annie. She has married a widower and she is going back with him to his crumbling mansion on the Yorkshire moors. Crumbling mansions seem to be a theme in this video. When Annie gets there, she thinks that her whole sordid past is now behind her. She is a legitimate married woman with a legitimate husband, and everything's going to be fine. But it is not fine, because Edward's sister Iris still lives in their crumbling Yorkshire estate, and she is a little bit strange. She is a taxidermist, but she also claims to be a medium, and she tells Annie from the minute that she arrives that something bad is going to happen to her. And she also tells Annie that she needs to watch out for falling black feathers, because black feathers are where a ghost has been. Annie dismisses Iris. She thinks that she's just trying to spook her because Iris doesn't want her to be there, but then she slowly starts to experience things which feel like a haunting. Now, all of this sounds very similar to all of the things that I absolutely loved in The Whistling, because we very much did have that thing of, is this supernatural or is this not supernatural? And The Whistling leaves that on kind of like a you decide. But again, I'm gonna need it to be done well and without the problematic things. And now finally I'm going to take you on a tiny tour of the things that I have pre-ordered for 2024. And I say a tiny tour because I'm not going to give you any kind of synopsis for them, because I will be doing a most anticipated for 2024 video later on in the year, because undoubtedly I will have gathered together more things by then. So the first of those is the Atlas Complex. This comes out on the 9th of January, and it is the final book in the Atlas 6 trilogy by Olivia Blake. We know how much I loved the Atlas 6. We know how much I want to read the end of this series. Next up, I didn't write down the date for this one, but it is very early in the year. We are going to get book 9 in the Wayward Children series, otherwise known as the dinosaur one. This is mislaid in parts half known, and it's a dinosaur one, guys. It's a dinosaur one. I don't care about anything else. It's a dinosaur. Coming out on the 18th of the 1st, we have the second in the Emily Wilde series coming out. I never remember the name of this. Emily Wilde's map of the something to do with the other lands. But the cover's beautiful, so yay for that. And also yay for more like enemies to lovers snark, let's be honest. And then on the 1st of August, we will get Brother Song, and those are both of the last books in the republished Green Creek saga that Waterstones are doing nice editions of. Also on the 15th of the 2nd, we are getting An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson, so more sapphic stabby goodness essentially. At some point, I think in March, we are getting What Feasts at Night, which is the sequel to What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. Now don't get me wrong, this is a sequel that I don't really think that we need, but it is T. Kingfisher, and almost everything that she writes really sells me at some point. On the 2nd of April, we have The Reappearance by Rachel Price, which is another standalone thriller by Holly Jackson. Honestly, Holly Jackson can just like take a standing order out of my bank account for whenever she publishes books at this point. On the 22nd of August, we have got Ootlin, a memoir by Jenny Fagan. This is a memoir from the author of Luckenbooth and the Panopticon, of her time in the Scottish care system and the like truly horrific way that she was shuffled around that and what she experienced. I'm very excited for this. Jenny Fagan's writing is beautiful. And then finally, at some mysterious point in 2024, we will be getting The Examiner by Janice Hallett, which is so early in its announcement that we don't even have like a cover for it or anything or a synopsis, but it is Janice Hallett's next book, so I will be buying it. And that is it, guys. That is a complete tour of what I am planning to purchase before the end of the year and going into the start of next year, and the way that I'm trying to look at the patterns in my book buying to do something good for my brain. Let's face it, my brain really deserves me to do something good for it at this point. So if you've got this far through the video, then please leave me the clock emoji down below as we watch the time tick down to our most anticipated releases being released into the world, landing on our Kindles or on our doormats. And if you're excited for any of the books that I've mentioned today, then please let me know about that in the comments. And if you think I have missed any books that you think that I will really love, then let me know about them too. Don't forget to check out and celebrate Anna Louisa's 5th birthday using my code down in the description below. If you are new and you would like to see a complete list of what is coming in 2024 that I think that you should be looking out for, then please hit that subscribe button to keep an eye out for that. And if you have enjoyed this video, then please hit that thumbs up because it really does help my channel. And I'll speak to you guys soon. Bye!